morning everyone. In this series of videos we're going to be looking at London by William Blake. This particular video is all about the context of the poem and its poet. There's a link in the description to the other videos, as well as a link to the slides if you want them. So let's dive into the context with a bit of background about Blake. William Blake was a poet and an artist, but he was not really well known at the time that he was alive. He mainly started getting recognised for his skills as a poet after he died, as is the case with so many artists. In fact, even though he was pretty much an unknown whilst he was alive, the BBC ranked him as the 38th greatest Briton a few years ago. Not even the 38th best poet, the 38th best person who ever came from Britain. He beat Henry VIII, Freddie Mercury, J.K. Rowling. Not bad, considering that he died essentially penniless. The poem London comes from Blake's most famous collection of poems that he published, called Songs of Innocence and Experience. And apparently, he had only sold around 30 copies of this book before he actually died. It has now sold millions of copies. He was also known as a painter and an engraver. He reportedly spent his last few pennies on a pencil to sketch the artwork for Dante's Divine Comedy, a book which is responsible for most people's understanding of hell. However, Blake died in 1827 after only sketching a few drafts for it. Back to the poem. London was published in 1794, when Blake was around 37, so we can infer that this poem was a poem of experience as opposed to innocence. It just gives his somber outlook on the world, a very bleak view of the world that he was living in. And William Blake was what is known as a romantic poet. Other romantic poets from the Power and Conflict cluster include Shelley and Wordsworth. Think of romantic poets as sort of being like the punk rockers of their day. Amongst other things, they despised the establishment, hated the people in power, hated the idea of organised religion, hated the imbalance in the world, and they generally wanted to rebel. Mainly through the power of poetry. They thought that the idea of revolution was quite a good one, and Blake wanted that for Britain. He was very much a supporter of the French Revolution. And 1794, when the poem was published, was during the time of the French Revolution, which went on from 1789 to 1799. This was a 10-year revolution in France, and is a pretty complex topic. The simple version being that the working class, dissatisfied with heavy taxes and poor living conditions, rose up and overthrew those in power and took control by force. They even executed their king, Louis XVI, who is now known as the last king of France. It's clear that this poem is about Blake's beloved city of London and how it has become corrupt. There's huge inequality due to the greed of those in power, and generally, Blake wasn't too happy with those conditions. Sort of like the conditions that led to the French peasantry rising up in the Revolution. So this poem acts as a sort of rebellion in itself. He even hints at the idea of rebellion when writing about the blood running down the palace walls. But we'll discuss that later when we look at the language of the poem in another video. Thanks for watching, I hope you found it useful, and if you did, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's really useful, really helpful, and that's all for today. Happy revising.